Let's wrap up the trade deadline. Pacers President of Basketball Operations Kevin Pritchard talk about it. We'll talk about what we learned from that and what it suggests about the Pacers' potential future plans, plus what other trades around the league impacted the Pacers, especially in the standings. How could it matter at the end of the season? Which teams' moves should Pacers fans keep an eye on? And at the end, we'll talk about the Pacers on the court because they have lost 15 of their last 17 games. Not a good time for the Pacers right now. All coming today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today we're wrapping up trade deadline coverage here in Pacerland. Kevin Pritchard, President of Basketball Operations, spoke about the trade deadline, the team, the decisions the Pacers made. I want to talk about what he said, what I think it means, what it could mean for the future, and the last little tweaks that will be made as the Pacers progress through their roster. A little switch up that they made last Thursday and Friday. We did also get to speak to Jordan Nwora and George Hill. Sounds like they have a chance to debut tonight as the Pacers take on the Jazz. Second segment, we'll talk about other trades made around the league that impact the Pacers, to me at least. There's quite a few, and most trades have impact on most teams, but these specific ones, especially this season, are important. And at the end, we'll talk about the Pacers weekend that was. 2 losses to the Suns and the Wizards, 2 non-competitive losses. Pacers really, really struggling right now. But we start closing out, looking at the deadline from the Pacers' perspective. If you're not aware, there are some slight updates to this, but the Pacers acquired Jordan Nwora, Serge Ibaka, and George Hill from the Bucks in a trade. They also got 3 second-round picks in that trade and cash considerations. They waived 3 players to facilitate that deal, those being Goga Bitadze, Terry Taylor, and James Johnson. Serge Ibaka has already been waived by the Pacers. The trade is fully complete. Physicals all passed on, all that. Justin Dopirak reported it. I reported it. James Johnson was sitting in the crowd at the Pacers game on Friday. They would like to bring him back to the Pacers. He did clear waivers on Sunday at 5 p.m. They could save a little bit of money if they just wait till Monday to sign him, if they want to have him for their game on Monday against the Jazz. So if that is the plan, it sounds like James Johnson could be signed later today. So that's all the moves. But maybe that wasn't plan A for the Pacers. Kevin Pritchard did say, and I thought this was very noteworthy, look, he says that the Pacers try to be aggressive a lot, and that's true. I think they are generally a fairly aggressive team in transactional periods. But the one that made this one click a little different in my head is when he said they're trying to be super active and aggressive in this trade deadline period. And Kevin Pritchard said there were a couple of players we wanted to be aggressive to acquire. We made those offers, suggesting that they actually looked for those players and made offers for them, not just your typical, like, there's some guys we thought about and, put out the feelers for. Like, they went and tried to get them. And he said it didn't work, so they pivoted to get their assets, their liquid assets. He said they call them dry powder, whatever. Those second-round picks that could end up being important picks, could end up being assets for trade in the future, whatever. A helpful, powerful tool, especially given how useful these second-round picks were at the trade deadline that just happened. And I think that's kind of the story of this trade deadline. And I thought I wanted to dig a little deeper there because they were well under 500 when the deadline actually happened. And Pritchard did admit in a question from Bob Kravitz in The Athletic that Tyrese Haliburton's injury did change the way they had to think kind of from all of this, right? Him getting hurt, they lose a bunch, and that really makes you have to reconsider, how well you've been playing, what you actually need, and all sorts of that kind of stuff. And Pritchard admitted it did change their thinking. And so, but he also said, because I wanted to know, when did you decide that, being aggressive was the plan? What made you feel like that's the right time? And his quote verbatim was, I think it comes to the fact that identifying players that fit with this core, whether positionally or talent or character or all 3 of the above, we try to identify those guys a couple weeks before there's exploratory talks. And at the end of the day, we made some big offers, and it takes 2 to tango. Sometimes you can get them and sometimes you can't. So it sounds like a couple things happen here, but you think about a couple weeks, right? Haliburton's injury was just a couple weeks ago, even still about a month, right? So it sounds like piecing this all together. remember the Pacers were 23-18 at the trade deadline, that they were good, and realized that if there's guys they like that fit their MO, that are under contract and talented and can be on their team for a long time going forward and be a valuable piece at a position of need and fit character-wise, all those things that he mentioned from a perspective of fit, right? Many things go into that, but age, talent, character, all that. They identified some guys they liked, and they went for them. They tried to get them. A significant level of players based on the way he talked about it. And Zach Lowe, on the Low Post, reported he heard, I have not corroborated this myself or asked anyone, but that the Pacers offered 3 firsts and the Rockets second for OG Anunoby, right? That would be one of those big moves. I think Kevin mentioned 2 players specifically at some point being the number that they were offering for. I can't exactly find it. But, like that is sort of how it was. Yeah, he said when 15 teams go after those 2 players, that's the focus. And I asked, that was an answer to a question when I asked what made this trade deadline unique. And it was kind of that, like, every team in the league was kind of going for these same 2 guys, and nothing really happened Wednesday, and then everything happened Thursday. So it seemed like the Pacers, maybe, I don't know if it's Anunoby or not, but that was the reporting, that they went for like an upgrade or a sizable upgrade at some sort of forward spot. They made their offers and they were denied. And he even said it takes 2 to tango. So perhaps that is what actually happened here for the Pacers. They tried to get these guys. The offers it would have taken to get them were too substantive for where the Pacers are in their build, and it's smart to be thinking that way. You don't want to go for it. They're not like in the situation where, for example, the Bucks when they got Drew Holiday, right? They were clearly good. They were very close to being a finals team. They had just lost to the title Raptors, right? You can go for it. You can overpay at that stage because you just need one more piece, and you're right there, your stars, you don't have that much time with them left. The Pacers are not even close to that kind of situation. They have to think about what their assets mean for them. And so that is what I think the story of this trade deadline is for the Pacers is they attempted to be aggressive. They wanted to do certain things to grow their team, and they assessed their team in whatever time and decided a couple weeks ago, these are the guys we should go for, put offers in on. And that didn't work out. It was not possible for them. They can't just want a player and get them. They have to negotiate. And that part of the process is clearly where this got tricky. It takes 2 to tango. And so Kevin Pritchard said they pivoted. They saw this is something that him and this front office have been very good at, getting in on these bigger deals. It's what they did in the Oladipo trade to get LeVert and picks and stuff like that. That's what they did in the Westbrook trade to get Isaiah Jackson, right? 2 different times, actually 3 now. They've jumped in on a giant trade being made elsewhere. James Harden wants out of Houston. How can we help? How can we help? We want to jump in on this and move our pieces around. And out of that, the Pacers get good value for Victor Oladipo at a great time. The holy cow, the Russell Westbrook trade from Washington to LA. Pacers say, wait, we can help. We want that Washington pick, and we'll send some seconds and some salary around to help balance things. And they said, okay. And the Pacers get Isaiah Jackson out of that trade. And then this year, again, the Kevin Durant trade, they say, hey, we can take your money and we'll take your picks while you're at it. That's something they're good at. That's a good pivot. That's a good way to get out of things, to help other teams get out of things, and get assets along the way. So that is sort of the story of the trade deadline as told by Kevin Pritchard. Good use of pivots, good use of space, and an interesting way to think about this. And generally, I think that it's noteworthy always when teams talk about going after, we don't know who the players are. It's been reported who they are, but I don't know who they are. But it's always noteworthy when that stuff happens, right? A lot of times it can be circled back upon in future transaction periods, right? You just saw this with Kevin Durant. The Suns were all over it in the offseason. It didn't work out. Trade deadline comes, bang, they get it done, right? That happens quite often in the NBA, where the first round of talks is not the last round of talks. So that's why I think the Pacers' aggression is noteworthy. Keep an eye on that to be relevant in the summer. And we'll see where this goes, but I expect the last bow on the Pacers trade deadline to be whenever they bring back James Johnson, or maybe someone else, but it sounds like it's going to be James Johnson. And that's that. Other trades were made in the NBA, though, and quite a few of them do have an impact on the Pacers and what their fortune could look like the rest of this season, whether that's in terms of draft positioning or assets moving around or what's available for them to trade for or not trade for in the future, or teams on their same timeline of building, all sorts of things that I think are insanely fascinating when it comes to the trade deadline. Like I always talked about this with the Irving trade last week, for example, with Red. It's like these trades aren't just like the Mavs and the Nets or the Suns and the Nets. It's all the teams have some impact from these deals. So let's dive right in. What other trades impact the Pacers? We'll talk about it in segment 2. Before we do that, though, let me talk to you guys about LinkedIn Jobs. As a small business owner or hiring manager, you know that success in 2023 all depends on the team members you surround yourself with. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. With LinkedIn Jobs, you can hire qualified candidates more efficiently by matching open roles with people who have the skills, values, and experiences to help you achieve your goals. LinkedIn Jobs helps you quickly attract qualified candidates to your open jobs with targeting tools that go beyond resume data by using insights from your job post, your company, and their 875 million member profiles to put your post in front of the right people. You can identify those quality candidates on LinkedIn Jobs, and they make it easy to screen and rate your applicants based on job qualifications all on their platform. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs number one in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, hop on over to, I'm going to say Locked On Blazers. Not only will you get to hear about their trade deadline, which is a little confusing to me, but also about the 4-team trade that's being held up, but not held up now by physicals from the Gary Payton injury saga. Interesting stuff going on. Blazers certainly heavily involved there. Mike Richmond will have the story for you. Let's continue to talk about the trade deadline. For the last segment, I will be talking about the trade deadline this season unless something else pops up that requires it. But look, the trade deadline isn't just what the Pacers did. It's what every team did, right? And there's a lot of trades around the league every year that impact the Pacers, their fortunes, their standings, what they'll have to consider as the season progresses. And I have two of the, I think 13 deadline trades. I have 8 of them that I thought were worth talking about, at least as it comes to the Pacers season down the stretch of this year. The first one being the Houston Rockets. Why do the Houston Rockets matter? I'll get into this in more detail during an All-Star Break podcast, which is coming up later this week. The Rockets, the Pacers could have their second round pick. If the Rockets finish with one of the worst 2 records in the NBA, the Pacers get their second round pick. And the Rockets got worse at this trade deadline. They traded away Eric Gordon. He is off to the Clippers. They get a first-round pick swap out of that. They traded away Bruno Fernando. They got Justin Holiday, ex-Pacer, John Wall, a couple other pieces that aren't helping them this year. Most likely will get bought out. Danny Green going to Houston as well. They got worse. They lost Eric Gordon. He's a good player. There's a reason the Clippers wanted him. They'll be worse. Their chances of landing in the bottom 2 went up. They currently have the worst record in the league, but they're only half a game ahead, air quotes, of San Antonio. And all 4 of the worst teams in the league, Houston, San Antonio, Charlotte, and Detroit, all have 43 losses right now. The Rockets have 13 wins. The San Antonio Spurs have 14. The Hornets have 15, and the Pistons have 15. To sum it up shortly, Pacers fans would like the Rockets to lose as often as possible down the stretch of this season. And this trade makes that a little more likely. On the flip side, the Celtics made a trade. They got Mike Muscala from the Oklahoma City Thunder, backup center that they need. Robert Williams is still coming back from injury. Al Horford doesn't play back-to-backs, and Muscala has been good for the Thunder this year. They got better. They have the best record in the league, but not by much. They are only 1.5 games ahead of the Bucks. The Bucks have won 10 games in a row. The Nuggets are right there, only 2 behind. That's probably the top 3 in the league and going to be down the stretch. But the Celtics got better, and the Pacers own their first-round pick. It's less likely that falls any lower than 30 now. It's still possible. Bucks are rolling, like I said, but it's more likely that pick stays at 30 now because of that move made by Boston. The KD trade, look, the obvious part of this impact on the Pacers is they're involved. Jay Crowder was technically routed through them for them to get stuffed. It also makes the Nets worse a little bit, which will send them down the standings, which, similar to the Irving trade, the Kyrie Irving trade, increases the Cavs' chance of finishing ahead of them in the standings, which is good for the Pacers. It means Cleveland's more likely to be in the postseason and thus send their pick to the Pacers. Cavs have now won 6 games in a row. But it also means that Cleveland's pick's more likely to be worse because they're going to finish with a better record than the Nets. But also it means Phoenix will be better. Maybe Phoenix can catch Cleveland in the standings, although that is a 5.5 game gap right now. So we'll see where that lands from an impact perspective in terms of picks. But currently looking like that one is going to be a net negative for the Pacers, although the likelihood of getting a pick going up, I suppose, is a good thing. Inverse standings check. The Raptors, go for it. No one saw that one forthcoming. They trade a first and 2 seconds and Khem Birch for Jakob Poeltl to shore up their center rotation. That matters for the Pacers because the Toronto Raptors, first of all, close to the Pacers in the standings, 2 games apart. They're also 10th in the East. They're technically half a game behind Washington for that spot right now. They went for it. They're going for it. That hurts the Pacers' chances of making the play-in, first and foremost. If the Pacers would like to make the play-in, the Wizards trading away Rui Hachimura technically helps them, although maybe there's some addition by subtraction there. And the Raptors going for it certainly does not help them. So making the play-in will be more challenging for the Pacers than it was before the deadline in terms of acquisitions. Jordan Nwora and George Hill are not as impactful as Jakob Poeltl is. So their play-in chances went down, but their chances of staying high in the lottery, they're currently 6 to 1.5 games behind the Magic for 5th, went up. So some win there, some lose there, depending on which perspective you land on. But the Raptors trade, certainly, they were tied in the standings, I think, when the Raptors made that trade. Very impactful for the Pacers going forward. Speaking of inverse standings, somehow this matters. The Lakers. The Lakers got a lot better. Credit to the Lakers. I don't know how they did this. They were backed in a corner. They don't have a lot to trade. They got Malik Beasley and Jared Vanderbilt and D'Angelo Russell, who's better than Russell Westbrook right now, for a first-round pick in Westbrook. Really impressive stuff. They also got some very much needed second-round picks so they can make other trades in the future for Thomas Bryant, who reportedly requested a trade. Look, the Lakers are kind of out of sight, out of mind for the Pacers. They're in a different conference. The Westbrook trade did not happen. That was not a thing that has to be talked about anymore. That's the first thing is Westbrook's not going to be traded to the Pacers. Finally, we can stop talking about that. 2 things to note from the Lakers at the trade deadline. 1, they got a second-round pick in 2029 in one of their trades, which means they can protect their 2029 first-round pick, which means they may be able to trade it more creatively, which if they still have interest in Buddy Hield in the offseason could matter. 2, quietly, the Lakers are only 1.5 games away from the Pacers in the inverse standings. Pacers are 6th, Lakers are 7th. The Lakers getting better certainly increases the chances the Pacers finish with a worse record than the Lakers, which would be good for the Pacers if you are into the inverse standings at this stage of the season. Yeah, and then protecting that first is certainly a factor as well, which they did. I think that was the Thomas Bryant trade that they got a 2029 second rounder out of. I'm guessing that was very valuable to them. Also, in terms of standing stuff, like thinking about Cleveland again, the Pacers owning their pick, the Cavs did nothing. One of only 2 teams that made 0 trades this entire season. They're playing very well. They've won 6 in a row. I don't think they need to, so not really an impact there. Obviously, there can't be. The Bulls also did nothing, though. Chicago currently 26-30, 3-game losing streak, 8th in the inverse standings, 2 games away from the Pacers, pushing for the play-in though, which is only half a game out of. Them doing nothing probably makes it less likely they make the postseason, which is not as good for the Pacers, but they have too much talent to fall to the Pacers in the standings. So when you do nothing, effectively that means your impact cannot be anything, but still worth going over what those teams did and because of how they impact the Pacers this season and beyond. The Wizards, who are currently the 10th seed in the East by half a game at 26-29. Gosh, that's just painful to have come out of my mouth. They're the 9th seed in the East, actually. The Wizards traded away Rui Hachimura. That was a while ago now, but I still consider that a trade deadline move, and the deadline was 2 weeks away. But Hachimura reportedly requested a trade, whatever. The Wizards get a little worse from that. They, too, are, again, in that mix to, 1, either block the Pacers from making the postseason via the plan, or also in the mix to be a threat in the inverse standings for draft positioning. They got a little worse, although maybe, again, like I said earlier, some addition by subtraction. They also can convert contracts more effectively if they buy out Will Barton. So we'll see. Lots of stuff to sort out on that one. And the last trade, I think, here, there's 2 more, actually. Sorry. The Orlando Magic traded Mo Bamba for Patrick Beverley. That probably makes them worse because they're going to buy out Beverley. It sounds like they're also buying out Terrence Ross and maybe RJ Hampton. Kobe Rice reported that for the Orlando Sentinel. That's crazy. He was a first-round pick a few years ago. Look, he's a wing. I mean, if he's out there, not the craziest thing for the Pacers to potentially sniff around him in the future. Either way, the Magic got worse, but they just lost talent, which they need to free up minutes for young guys. That's fine for them, but it's going to be a little harder for the Pacers to catch them, although the Magic are playing better than the Pacers right now. They're 5-5 in their last 10 games. The Pacers are 2-8. And the last trade or trades that I think are relevant to the Pacers from this trade period, the Utah Jazz, they trade away Malik Beasley, they trade away Jared Vanderbilt, they trade away Mike Conley. They're worse. The Jazz are worse. The Jazz were a playoff hopeful, I would call them, I suppose, this year at 28-30 right now. They are 3 games away from the Pacers in the inverse standings. They could be a free fall level of bad down the stretch, depending on how things break. So lots of trades. In the East, most of the teams got a little bit better or went for it and will likely push away from the Pacers in the standings. In the West, some of them did, but you also have some teams that are clearly going to potentially get closer to them, like your Portlands, like your Utahs. So we'll see how this shakes out. But if you're an inverse standings fan, you're a big Magic fan for the rest of the season. And if you're a play-in fan, you did not like the trade deadline because the Raptors got better. We'll see how it all shakes out, though. The games actually matter for a reason, and we'll see how these trades matter on the court. It's been way too early to say. Jakob Poeltl has played 1 game for the Raptors. None of the Pacers' new guys have played. This will all shake out in due time. Speaking of games, Pacers played 2 this weekend. Neither of them were good performances. This team playing awful right now. Now that the deadline is done, we can focus on game stuff until the All-Star break because this team needs a kick in the pants. Let's talk about the Pacers weekend that was. Big loss to the Suns, big loss to the Wizards, and yet I have a stat for you, sort of, to tell you why I think they're about to figure out a formula to play a little better, and it's the simplest stat ever. We'll talk about it in the final segment here, but first, let me talk to you guys about FanDuel. We're at the midway point-ish of the NBA season. It's here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on anything, from the money line to point scorers, threes drained, you name it, they got it. The Pacers spread, the Pacers money line, whatever you feel like going for as they play the Jazz tonight. Will Tyrese Haliburton go over or under his point totals? All that on FanDuel. Plus, they even let you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day for your second listen. Oh, doing something bad. We're going across sports. Go to Locked On Chiefs or Locked On Eagles. Hear what you want to hear about the Super Bowl, which perspective you would like to hear. Really fun game. Really fun game. I don't watch much football these days, but I did enjoy the Super Bowl and the halftime show, and the Super Bowl's fun. It's an experience more than a game, and I really enjoyed it. Let's talk about, speaking of games, the Pacers weekend that was. Oof. Falling flat on your face are the Indiana Pacers right now. They have lost 15 out of 17. No, I did not misspeak. They have 2 wins in over a month. 2 wins since that. They beat the Hornets to go to 23-18 for the halfway point. Tyrese Haliburton goes down. They have won 2 games since to get to 25 wins. They have lost 15 times to get to 33 losses. They're not playing well. They are just not playing well. Haliburton came back. They're still not playing well. Rick Carlisle, I kind of asked him after the Suns game what he felt like has kind of behooved this team, if he could even sum it up in like a 1-word, 1-sentence kind of phrase. I didn't ask him to do that, but he pointed to rebounding first and foremost. It's something this team has done very poorly for quite a bit of time recently. Certainly they have near the bottom of the league in every rebounding metric. He said not any one thing, but rebounding has been a challenge for us all year long. Miles Turner talked about it being hard play is something the Pacers need to do. You never want to hear that if you're a fan of a team that they feel like they need to play harder. That's just painful to hear. You always want to see your team play as hard as possible. Credit to Nate McMillan. He was always very good at that. Either way, who is or isn't deserving fault for the way the Pacers are playing, they need to play better. And their rebounding was woeful against the Suns that night. They had 38. The Suns had 53. The Suns took 8 more shots than the Pacers. They shot a better percentage. They won. Pacers defense was not good in that game. They also only scored 104 points. They'll never win doing that. The very next night, I want to say rebound wars, but I don't know how to describe this. The Wizards couldn't miss. The Wizards shot 64%. They were shooting over 75% at halftime of that game. The Pacers had more offensive rebounds than defensive, not because they were bad at rebounding. There just weren't that many misses to grab in that game. They could not stop the Wizards at all. They actually scored pretty well. It was their most points in their last 8 games, 113 in Washington, but they give up 127. They give up 80 in the first half, and they lose to the Wizards. There's no kind of connection and flow and rhythm for the Pacers right now. They're not the team that they were that was running and and random action and making stuff happen and getting guys open and flinging the ball around. And it looked like everybody had energy. And now some guys do. Haliburton was 7 for 9 against the Suns. He had 18 points. Andrew Nembhard had 10 assists, although he missed all his shots. Miles Turner did not play well that game. Buddy Hield was okay. Aaron Nesmith was not that great. Mather was solid off the bench. He had 22 points. The rest of the bench was kind of okay. Isaiah Jackson was really good, but he only played in the fourth quarter. That's got to change. That will be a future segment. Certainly, the Tice minutes are coming on this show. I hear you, fans. I agree that is very strange. But they couldn't stop anybody, right? They had no punch. Haliburton was efficient, but they had no punch, and the Suns had a lot. The Wizards had so much punch, it was unbelievable. I mean, that was even beyond. Look, the Pacers did not defend well against Washington, but they shot like beyond what was reasonably expected for an opponent when you shoot over 75% in a half. Bradley Beal was 13 for 18. Monty Morris was 7 for 10. I mean, their whole starting five shot 50% or better. All their rotation shot 50% or better. It was insane. But their defense was to blame for part of it. Haliburton, Buddy Hield, none of those guys defended well. Nesmith missed all his shots. I mean, they couldn't get enough. Although Haliburton had 21 and 7. Miles Turner had 20 points again. Mathurin was doing good off the bench. Rick Carlisle, to his credit, although he did make the mistake already. Do you give someone credit for fixing a mistake? I do, although you have to acknowledge that they also made a mistake. Played Mathurin a bunch in both games this weekend after only playing him 13 games against the Heat. That should not happen again. Mathurin 33 minutes against the Suns and then 31 minutes against the Wizards. So what's going on with this Pacers team? Well, nothing's going right. And I hate to dumb it down that low to just say nothing is going well, but when you can't play the way that your identity you want to play because of your identity, that sentence did not make sense. When you can't play to the way that your identity dictates that you should play, right? Fast, early offense, in transition, get the stops to be in transition, get the rebound to be in transition, or fly up the floor at any opportunity to look for that quick shot to either bend a defense right away or make it so when you reset, you have more time to get a good look or whatever. All these things that the Pacers were doing very well all season. Suddenly, they're bottom 3 in offense in the year 2023. Bottom 3, bottom 5 in defense in the same stretch. Identities kind of evaporated. And some of that stretch, yes, they were without their all-star player, like half of that stretch. It's not really fair to use the since 2023 numbers, but they're not playing well on either end, even with him back recently, right? They weren't even cracking 111 points in a game, but one time in the stretch since he's returned. They have really struggled to put anything together. And that is such a lazy way to look at it, but they can't play fast. Teams are pressuring Haliburton more, so other guys have to break down the defenses. That's why you've seen a little more Andrew Nembhard on the ball. Get Haliburton off the ball, move the defensive pressure and attention somewhere else, and try to create plays elsewhere, but it hasn't been working. They haven't been able to get advantages out of the situations. Hield and Turner have scored well, but can only do so much, and the bench hasn't been good enough to kind of keep them in the game. So without the all-star punch to kind of get everybody else moving in motion, the Pacers just haven't really had it. They need to find a way to either get Haliburton back going or to get their other guys more connected in a way that when they do have to rely on the Nembhard point guard situation or the TJ McConnell situation. In fact, the Pacers' best minutes recently have amazingly been the McConnell plus Haliburton minutes because they have two really good ball handlers on the floor who can break down the defense. So if I had to kind of try to find a way to fix what's going wrong for the Pacers right now, one thing I would do is try those minutes a little more, right? They've been working well. McConnell was playing great with Haliburton out. If they can find a way to harness the power of both of those guys at the same time, keep the ball moving, get the ball into the paint, get those paint touches, spray it out, get good shots, that seems like it'd be good for them. It has been working for them, at least via the eye test. Forgive me if the numbers disagree. In the last couple of games, they're actually creating penetration, making defenses bend and looking good. And McConnell's been playing pretty well for all of the year 2023. He had 9 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists against the Suns. He had 9 points and 3 assists against the Wizards. He's just doing well. The other thing that I think is noteworthy is I was talking to Haliburton about the same kind of question I asked Carlisle. What kind of theme or words would you put on this team struggles recently? The thing I asked Turner, and he said hard play. And Haliburton said a couple things, but he said, I've been terrible recently, right? He said he thinks he's been playing awful. And he brought up something he hasn't brought up in a while after I asked him this question, and that's the balance of his shot attempts and passes, right? And I brought this up with him a lot because he brought it up a lot. He was searching for that balance a lot last year, and he found it early in the season. He was shooting more. He needed to be more aggressive, and that kind of went away, right? Remember, he comes back, and he plays against the Lakers. 24 shot attempts. That's probably a little too much, but that's a lot. He scored 26 points. He had 12 assists. He was great in that game. The very next game, he takes 12 shots. That's probably a little on the low side, but he was still good. They won. He was plus 18. Then in the next 3 games, he took 10, 8, and 9. That's too low. That's too low. That's not going to make Tyrese Haliburton the most effective possible if the defense can kind of play him in a way that they can kind of feel he's not going to be that threatening, right? In the 19 games that Tyrese Haliburton has taken 6 shots or more, they have 12 wins, right? That's very good. When he is aggressive and looking for a shot, that might be 11 wins. That's 11 wins. Excuse me. They're 11 and 8. That's still good, right? When he hunts for his shot and is the dude on offense, the Pacers are better. And I think he kind of knows that. In the games with his fewest shot attempts, right? If he takes less than 12, they have 1 win in 7 games, right? For example. So I think that is the stat I would look at as the pace. And look, he's kind of working back from injury, and you could see it a little in the Wizards game. He was hunting for his shot in that outing after he said that to me. He's always very aware of it and tries to correct. He took 16 shots. He had 21 points, right? Clearly was a little more effective, at least from a scoring punch. His assist numbers weren't, his defense was bad, but getting better there. I think that if he can find that balance again and get the shots up and be the aggressor that makes the defense bend and forces their attention and all their eyes to wander all over the court, I think the Pacers offense will recover. And so that is the key stat that I think will be important in these final 2 games before the break. Tyrese Haliburton shot attempts. Does he take 15 or more in both of these last 2 games? The Pacers are at their best. Not when he's hunting and he's being shot heavy, but when he's trying his best to find his spots and mix that into his game, that's when this team's at their best. He is their best player for a reason. And I'm looking forward to seeing if he can find a way to do it. We'll be, of course, talking Pacers Jazz tomorrow on this show, as well as various other Pacers topics with the deadline coming right up. Did Jordan Nwora debut? How did he look? George Hill, same question. We're talking all that and a potential, if it happens, tomorrow. James Johnson re-signing. And then we'll close out the week talking Bulls, talking All-Star, all sorts of stuff. Fun days coming for the Pacers this week. And I'll have it all for you here on Locked On Pacers. I'm on Twitter at TEastNBA. This show is at Locked On Pacers. Hope you had a great weekend and enjoyed the Super Bowl. Till then, we will see you tomorrow.